All right, something that's been on my heart lately is the temple and how to talk about the temple to new members, people who haven't been before, but also how to think about the temple if you have been for a while, kind of maybe mix up some thoughts just to kind of make sure we are capable of thinking about things as if we are somebody else, putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes. Um, when I so I've heard in the past few years about how the temple is weird and scary for some people, and when you go to the temple, someone might prepare you to go to the temple by saying, if you think it's weird, it's okay. If you think it's scary, if it's uncomfortable, if you get anxiety, and that's like in some circles, I guess, a typical thing to tell somebody right before they go to the temple for the first time. And that hasn't been my experience, and I know that hasn't been the experience of some of the new members of the restoration that I've been working with. And so I wanted to share some thoughts, and if anybody has any insight onto how to do this better, let me know because I'd be super curious. And I know it's different for everybody, so obviously I'm not pretending like I can present something that's going to work for every single person. I remember when I was young, maybe 12 or 13, 14, there was a convert in the ward that was coming from Catholicism, and she was older. She was like 30. And I heard my mom ask her about going to the temple. And my mom asked the question as if it was like, it's okay to give an uncomfortable response. Like, how was the temple for the first time? Was it like, how was it? And her response was, it was great. I really enjoyed it. It reminded me a lot of the Catholic and Orthodox stuff that I used to do. And I think my mom was a little bit surprised. I was surprised because I'd never heard anybody say that. And so in my mind, I'm starting to think like, oh, what we do in the temple is probably something that other churches are doing in some form or another. And so I was like 12 or 14 or whatever. And then when I'm 18, this is like 2005 or something, I'm preparing to go on a mission. I go through the temple, and my temple prep was pretty minimal, like officially. I don't think I did a temple prep class. I had spent a couple semesters at BYU. Anyway, when I went to the temple, I did not feel like I had been prepared and that anybody had told me anything like, oh, expect to be wowed, expect to be freaked out, expect to have a good time. Like nobody told me anything like that. And I remember the stake president trying to like prepare me, and he told me stuff that was so vague and abstract. I didn't understand what he was saying. So I go to the temple, and I really had zero expectation of what the temple was going to be like, and this has been true for me in many other aspects of my life. But I didn't have any expectation. So when I went in, there was no expectation to meet on my part, which was a blessing because everything that happened didn't seem uncommon, atypical, abnormal. It didn't seem like anything because it was the first time I'd ever seen a ceremony like that or been participating in a ceremony like that. So I just assumed it was normal. And words like weird or strange just never came into my mind. And I did not go with a lot of family members. I went with some family members, but I went and did my own endowment session, and my dad was sitting next to me, and he was the only one in the room that I was aware of. Everybody else in the room, in my mind, were strangers that I didn't know, because the temple was not like our community temple. Temple was a couple hours from our house, and it wasn't until I got into the celestial room that I realized, oh, there's other people here that I know, and I guess that helped. I don't know that that made a huge difference, but it definitely helped to have my dad there. If I would have been there with complete strangers, that probably would have been a different experience. Um, and then fast forward to now, looking back, it is interesting to kind of see some of these new members going through the temple through for the first time in different ways, and watching me try to describe what's going on or what's going to go on in different ways and see their responses and reactions. So the thoughts that I have are basically trying like what would I do differently? What do I plan on doing going forward? And one of the things that I think has helped is to help people understand. Well, okay, so there's two different kinds of people that go through the temple. People who have been a part of those kinds of rituals in other spaces, and the people who have never been in any kind of ritual anywhere in any space. There are those two kinds of people who approach it. So one of the things that I like to tell people is that what happens in the temple is a ritual, and this ritual is very old, and it comes up in many different forms, and there are other churches that do it, there are other religions that do these types of things, and there's evidences that this is like thousands of years old. And so it's going to feel very old, and it is very symbolic, it's very repetitious. And for some people, that immediately clicks. That they're going to be doing something, like maybe an Orthodox type of ceremony, or like an Orthodox baptism, an Orthodox marriage. I've even seen churches on my mission where you'd walk in, and they would have a giant veil up front, and they would have partitions on the veil, like openings in the veil, and you could see people would be passing through the veil back and forth, and they would have these little prayers that they would do as they would go through the veil. And there's like prayer circles is a very common thing. Like I went to the Pentecostal church for a year, and they do prayer circles pretty regularly. Maybe not every Sunday, but pretty close. And there's a lot of symbols and signs and tokens, and like all the things that we do in the temple show up in different ways, and even in places you wouldn't expect. And so it's interesting that just saying that, just that one thing, that what we do in the temple is a very old ceremony that comes up in different places, seems to help people connect the dots of what to expect in a very open way, so that they're not trying to imagine, something unrealistic or scary or something like that. Because in my mind, telling somebody like, "Hey, if you think it's weird, it's okay," like that, how is that helpful? If you get scared, it's okay to cry. Like, how is any of that stuff helpful? I don't understand where any of that stuff would come from. But I just don't run in those circles, I guess. So that's one thing. Um, the other thing that tends to be helpful for people who have never been in any kind of ceremony or ritual like that is to tell them that, help people understand that even though this is a very ancient process and lots of people do it in different ways, that the things that you will learn will come over through time. So you're not expected to really absorb everything all at once. And that's one of the reasons why it's a repetitive process. And I remember talking to someone who is a longstanding member of the church, and I was kind of reflecting on the non-weirdness of the temple compared to the weirdness of Christianity in general. And you could see them like, oh my gosh, I've never thought about this before. And so I've started to incorporate some of that into the conversations, and that seems to be helpful as well, which is when if you're not familiar with the rituals, like let's say you have never participated in anything remotely close to an endowment. But for a lot of those people, something like the sacrament or a communion would seem perfectly normal. They don't think twice about it, which is weird, because the only reason that's normal is because you've seen it so many times, and it's just become a part of your accepted culture, your accepted routine. But if you had never seen the sacrament, if you'd never seen anybody bless a piece of bread and a little cup of water and then hand it to you, and you take the little piece of bread and a little cup of water, like if you'd never seen that before, it's really weird. It's a really weird thing to do. Like, why are we using a little piece of bread? Why not a whole slice of bread? Why not a loaf of bread? Why not a sandwich? And why not the unleavened bread like Christ used? And why is it water? Why isn't it wine? Or if you're not even familiar with the Bible, it'd be more like, why is it a little tiny glass and not a big glass? Like, I'm still thirsty. Am I not supposed to be thirsty after? Like, there's all this stuff about something that we perceive as perfectly normal, that if you stepped outside of the box of your tradition is not normal. It's weird. And Christianity in general is insane because we worship a God who existed before he came to this world. He came to this world through a virgin mother and grew up to be an adult, but then was publicly killed and then came back to life and then disappeared. He didn't even hang out to really explain what happened. It's not like he was here for a year or 100 years as an immortal God trying to, pick up the pieces of confusion that everybody was flailing around in. He just vanished. And so if you took that story to someone who's never heard it before, they're going to be like, why would I even give that story a chance of being believed? Because it's insane. But a lot of Christians um, think, well, yeah, it's kind of obvious that all of this stuff is true because, there's like an evidence or there's a witness or whatever it is. Um, and so that's what the temple is. The temple is when you go to the temple for the first time, you are experiencing something for the first time that will feel very normal after you go a few times, just like the sacrament, just like reading the Bible, just like hearing Christianity for the first time, or just like bearing testimony or feeling the Spirit. Like there's all these things that feel normal after a little while, but they start feeling not normal, and that's okay. It just doesn't help to describe them as, this is going to be this weirdest, scariest thing you've ever done. No, I'm sorry, it's not. It's not. Um, so those are some thoughts that I think have been helping some of the new members that we've been working with, and even non-members. Like, what are you guys actually doing in the temple? And I'll be like, well, have you ever seen a baptism? Okay, well, that's kind of what we do in the temple. Like, there really isn't that much of a difference. Have you ever seen a wedding? Have you ever seen a funeral procession? Have you ever seen and that's basically what we're doing in the temple. And it looks a little bit different because it's very symbolic, and we're trying to learn a process that we will actually take part in at some point in the future. But that's why it's special to us, is because it's an individual learning process that is done through repetition. So be super curious to know if anybody has any good thoughts on that. I will finish with this. We recently started a temple prep class, and I read through the temple prep material. And I went to the temple prep teacher, which we had just called, and she's very familiar with a lot of temple teachings in the past couple years. And I said, I want to give you full permission to use anything and everything you would like to above and beyond the temple prep curriculum as defined by the church. And she said, "Oh yeah, don't even worry about that. Like, I've looked through it already and I know it's outdated because it talks about things in there that are actually no longer a part of the temple ceremony, and it also references things that we're not going to go through, that the church has produced material on since then, just because the instruction material is so old. So I'm going to teach it the way I feel is appropriate, and I feel like I know what's appropriate through the Spirit, and having been through the temple and I've been a temple worker for a while." And I said, "Perfect. I think that's exactly the way it should be done. I don't want to be tied down to an instruction manual." Um, and she was on board with that. Um, and then the same thing has happened in other classes too. So it's been interesting to see different pushes and pulls with the instruction manuals and whatnot. Since then, we've learned that apparently there's going to be a revised temple prep curriculum that's being worked on and going to be released soon. So that makes me feel a little bit better about, like, not wholeheartedly um teaching from that manual that is now, I don't know, 15 or 20 years old. So, what are your thoughts? Let me know.